Good morning. So I'm Sarah, one of the support leaders here, it's great to be here this morning. I've got the privilege of finishing up the series that we've been looking at in Matthew 11 for the last 4 weeks. So once again, we are looking at the same verses, Matthew 11, 28 to 30, finding rest for the soul. So today we're actually going to be looking more at the body, this sort of whatever amount of us there is, of flesh and bones and all the rest of it. Okay, and how we use that. So Derek, Steve and Emma have talked about other aspects of finding rest for the soul over the last 3 weeks, and it's worth going back and listening to those. So first off, our verses. Matthew 11, verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's Jesus talking 2,000 years ago, but it's still relevant for us today. We can be weary, we can be burdened in our minds, our souls. We can be weary and burdened in our spirits. And we can be weary and burdened in our bodies. And the thing is, we can't really separate these things out. In some ways, it's good to look at them individually, but we are whole beings. And if I said to someone, just think about eating a lemon now, about putting that in your mouth. For a lot of people, that makes their mouth water. If someone gets very stressed, the heart rate goes up. Decreased sleep, sweating, all of those kind of things. Our body responds to what's going on in our minds. If our body isn't well or is in pain or under stress, our mind responds. And when we get that peace that passes understanding in our spirit, that affects our minds and our bodies. And I didn't know which song Stu was going to use just before this. So, as I say, today we're focusing on bodies. So, and I know it has been said, but I'm also aware that not everybody's been here every week. What is a yoke? In Bristol, we don't see a lot of them. Certainly not the ones that are spelt like this. Okay? So, a yoke is something to harness two animals together, to work together. Or it's come up as together rather than in separate slides, sorry. And that yoke, it shares the load. And it also helps to train an inexperienced animal in what they're supposed to be doing. In Jesus' time, when they were talking about a yoke, though, it would also mean the yoke of the Torah, or the commandments, the teaching of God, that invitation to trust God's wisdom. And each teacher around, each rabbi, might have interpreted it different, but they wouldn't have called it their own yoke. They would have said the yoke of the Torah. The yoke of the commands, that kind of thing. They would have always attributed it to someone else in that sense. But Jesus actually says, take my yoke. He actually claims that authority to have that standing in what his teaching is. His teaching stands alongside the teachings that Moses gave in the Old Testament. He is speaking as God. But the thing is, when Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, we kind of think, oh, that's great. And then go, one sec, that still means a yoke and it still means a burden. Okay? But it is actually an easy burden. The trouble is, sometimes I think we look at it and go, oh, that's hard. The trouble is, change is hard. When we move from one thing to another, that is hard. It may well be easier once we've got used to it, but it will feel harder at the beginning. And it is a light burden. We are designed to carry a certain amount of burden. We're designed to work. And, even in the garden, when humans were created, They were told to work. It became hard. Work became difficult when sin entered and things went wrong. But we are designed to work. I think the other thing about Jesus' yoke, Jesus' burden, is that it is bearable because we're doing it with Jesus. You know, a yoke is there, as I said, to share the load. We're not doing this alone. We're not just trying to live a life like Jesus on our own. We're doing it with him. And I think it's also, we have to remember that he takes far more of the share of that load than we do. You know, how many of us have been carrying something with a child? You know, I remember taking stuff down to the beach when our kids were small, and we'd have, you know, something outside, big bag, usually an IKEA bag, and Chris and I would be carrying the handles, and the girls might be holding at the front and back because they were going to help us. And they were helping us, but on the other hand, as adults, we were taking the bulk of the load. And actually, it's the same with Jesus and this. He takes the bulk of the load, but we are there to help. And it made a difference for us. If we didn't have the girls, then sometimes when you got a long thing running through the thing, the whole thing would tip over. Having them there did make a difference. It stopped that happening. But they weren't taking as much of the load as they thought they were. So, what does it mean to be weary and burdened in body? That can be caused by things like sickness, by tiredness. It can be caused by exercise. It can be caused by stress, which affects our bodies. It can be caused by a lack of rest. We've just done too much. A lack of sleep. A lack of food. And that can make us feel very tired, lethargic, worn out. So what is Jesus' yoke? His teaching about our bodies. And I think one of the things we see when we look at Jesus, he teaches, and right through the whole Bible, that bodies are good. You know, we are created good. And actually back in Genesis 1, God even says the only thing he ever says is very good is when he creates humans. As physical human body beings. God took on a body. Bodies are good. Jesus is God. And Jesus looked after his body. So what is his demonstration of this? He rested, he slept, he ate, he worked hard. He also knew what it was to be weary. He knew what it was to face a load that he actually thought he couldn't bear. When we look in Luke 22, right at the end of the story of Jesus' life, just before he goes to the cross, in the Garden of Gethsemane, we see that he's sweating blood. He wasn't sure at that point he could take that burden. But he turned to his Father God to help. And the following day, he did. He died for us on the cross. You know, that's something that we look at and you think, yes, actually, I know I've had days when I thought, I can't do this anymore. And yet, I know that Jesus has been there too. So when he says, live by my yoke, he actually knows what he's talking about. So if we're living by that yoke of Jesus, we're working alongside Jesus. We're being guided by him. And we are sharing the load. So I suppose some of the questions I want to ask is, are we doing what Jesus is doing today? You know, when we look at what he did, are we doing those things? Are we going where Jesus is going today? And are we doing those things with others that are doing them too? So in other hands, are we actually just living life as a follower of Jesus? Are we taking his burden upon us? Because it is the easy burden. And I think something Emma said last week, and when I actually spoke on this same passage 5 years ago, said that if we add to Jesus' teaching to our lives, we become overburdened. And as Emma then said, we need to remove the yoke that we're under in order to take on Jesus' yoke. We can't do both. We need to replace the life that we feel we want with his. Live life Jesus' way. John Mark Comer, in his book Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, says, an easy life isn't an option, but an easy yoke is. I'll say that again. An easy life is not an option. An easy yoke is. Okay? So I suppose we can ask the question, how did Jesus use his body? Jesus, he walked miles. He went to parties. He laughed. He worshipped. He prayed. He was disciplined in how he used his body. He got up early to pray. He prayed late at night. And I don't think that's because he had to do one or the other specifically. You've got to do this as a rule. It's a case of he took any opportunity he could to pray. He rested. He slept. And on one occasion, he was so tired that he got into a boat and slept in the bottom through the middle of a storm that was scaring the seasoned sailors to the point where they thought they were going to die. And he was so physically tired that he slept. He fasted. He feasted. He worked. He served people. He led people. He worked hard. All of these things. And the disciples, his apprentices, they walked with him and did a 3-year apprenticeship. And they learned by watching. They learned by what they experienced. Jesus sent them out to go and do it for themselves. They did it together. And I think what they learnt and what we do learn and sometimes then forget is that what we do with our bodies matters. It affects us, it affects others. In 1 Corinthians, one of the letters that Paul wrote, it's in the New Testament, he says, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you receive from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price. Therefore, honour God with your bodies. What we do with our bodies does matter. It does matter. When we look at Jesus and how did he view other people's bodies, we see that he healed them. In Matthew 9, we see a woman that was bleeding. So it's just 2 chapters before we read these verses. In Mark 5, telling the same story, Mark says that she was freed. He healed her body. But he healed hundreds of people throughout his 3-year ministry. He fed them. Only a couple of chapters later, we read that Jesus fed 5,000. We often hear of it as the feeding of the 5,000. It was probably double that, at least, because 5,000 was the number of men. The women and children weren't counted. So Jesus fed all of them. He looked after their bodies because they were tired and they were hungry. He healed other people. And there's one occasion, or many occasions actually, a couple, where he healed people on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was supposed to be a day when you did no work at all. And yet Jesus healed people because he wanted them to be whole. He saw their bodies as important. He danced, he ate, he drank. In John 2, we read he went to a wedding in Cana. He celebrated with people. And Jesus wanted his disciples to rest when they needed it. Just around the story of the feeding of the 5,000, in Mark 6, Jesus says, or it says in there, because so many people were coming and going, they didn't even have a chance to eat. He said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So Jesus wanted his disciples to rest. The trouble was people found them. Probably somewhere like 10,000 of them found them. And So Jesus then fed them. The disciples still hadn't had a proper rest. So he sent them off. And it says, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. So he made sure his disciples got rest. He then went off and got rest himself and prayed. And I think, that's important. How we see other people, how we work with other people. Actually honouring other people by allowing them rest, by encouraging that rest is good. So I suppose overall, when we look through Jesus' teaching, there's almost nothing on the sort of explicit, this is what you do with your body, this is how carrying a light yoke means for your body. But actually, when we look at all the different bits and pieces, the way Jesus acted, the way he treated other people, the different things he did say, we see that Jesus sees the body as important. He wants to see it whole. Do we ask for healing today? Jesus wants us to come and ask for healing. Do we feed our bodies healthily? Do we make sure and help others to be well fed, here and abroad? Do we exercise? Now, we never see Jesus saying he was exercising. Have you seen how many miles he walked? When I was a student, I used to exercise so I could get from A to B. I cycled everywhere. So that meant a minimum of 5 miles a day, sometimes up to 16. I didn't need to exercise because of that. Now I exercise because I don't do that as part of a normal everyday life. And I want to stay mobile and capable for as long as possible. Do we rest well? There's a lot of teaching about Sabbath rest, which is basically saying, look, rest in God's presence. A real peace, a real shalom, that sort of Jewish word that means more than just quiet. It's not just an absence of war. It's much more that sense of peace that is actually passing understanding. When things are tough, when everything is against you, when everything feels like it's just fallen apart, again, for the 19th time, it's having that peace because God is with you. That's that Sabbath rest. It's not about a specific day, it's about living that life of rest. Do we encourage others to rest well? So I suppose, and I said it earlier, but I am going to repeat it deliberately. Are we living by the yoke of Jesus, living life as a Christian, following Jesus as our leader? Are we working alongside Jesus? Are we guided by him? Are we sharing the load? Are we doing what he's doing today? And that's going to look different for every single one of us. Are we going where he's going today? Are we doing this together as community? And if you're standing here or sitting here and thinking, but that's okay, that's for Christians, that's something that Christians do, there is still a choice to make. Do you want to carry that heavy burden? Or do you want to swap it for the light burden? That's the choice that you have to make. And it's there and it's available. And anybody can make that. So like I said at the beginning, I'm finishing up the series on this. So I suppose overall, these 3 verses, and actually Tundi, can you put them back up? I didn't put them on the thing. Right at the beginning of the slides. Come to me, you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Are we listening to Jesus and taking on his yoke, his teaching? Are we living it out? Are we listening for our mind, our soul, our body, our spirit? Are we living life his way, by his yoke, by the light, easy yoke? Or are we living life our way, the heavier, burdensome, tiring yoke? And as John Mark Comer said, you don't have a choice as to whether you carry one. It's which one you carry that you have a choice. How are we using our bodies? Are we living out day by day the teaching of Jesus? And it's not about a case of rule following. It's about living life the Jesus way, the way of love. So if Jesus' teaching is his yoke, one of the last things that he taught his disciples to do was to break bread together. So we're actually going to go straight into a time of communion this morning. And Jesus did this the night before he died at the Last Supper. So this is one of the things that he said to his disciples at that time that he wanted them to teach others and for us to then do. So communion, it's the ultimate example of Jesus. He lived, he died for us. He lived and died because he is love. And when we look at communion, we see this is what it actually looks like, living the life that Jesus lived his life. Jesus asks us to use communion as a time to remember. Not just a remembrance, but actually as an example to follow. And the things that you face, the things I face, might not look like a cross. And in this day and age, it's very unlikely it will. But it will look like a walk of love. So Jesus used bread and wine because that was what was on the table in front of him. We have gluten-free bread and Ribena, whatever it is, blackcurrant juice. And these things demonstrate what he did for us. He was broken for us. He was poured out for us. We are to live this life of love with Jesus. We don't do this on our own. We do this with him. And I'll tell you what, that's a lot easier than doing it on our own. And we're doing that empowered by him. So this morning, as we take the bread and the juice, thank Jesus. Remember his example. But also ask him, what does Jesus' yoke, his teaching, look like in your life, here and now? In this November, December 2025, what's that going to look like?